3 true horror stories of skinwalkers and cryptids. Scary stories. What's going on, my Night Owl crew? And welcome to a segment I call Too Scared to Sleep. So tonight, join me as we dive into the unknown world with 3 true horror stories of skinwalkers and cryptids. I think of myself as a skeptic and have dismissed most cryptozoology and paranormal claims until the next event. In Northeast Ohio, it was the late summer of 2005. I was about to start my junior year of high school and was staying at my closest friend's house for the night. And for the sake of it, we decided to sleep outside in our sleeping bags for the night. It was a pleasant enough night. The weather was pleasant. It was a warm night. The sweet melodies of crickets filled the air. It had that particular kind of feeling in the air where you're far enough away from the last time, and the sky couldn't have been clearer for those far-off spring peepers. It rained so lightly that it didn't feel heavy, and instead felt pleasant, rather than humid and depressing. This was the closest thing to a lovely scene. As hot as summers can get. Everything was engulfed in the dark blue elegance of the evening. It was simple to fall asleep in the light. This was a year when mosquitoes were unusually scarce, making sleep in an open tent with only a sleeping bag a risky proposition. As terrible luck would have it, I had to give in to nature's call. As a result, I awoke from my sleep to do so. My friend's yard was quite large, with a wooded area bordering it. After finishing, I staggered back to my sleeping bag, realizing my friend was not in his. We were set up a few feet apart, in case a bear crept in and grabbed someone in the middle of the night or something. Or give the other one enough time to flee to safety. You know, the burrow code. In any case, in my peripheral view, I see him standing along the side of a shed in his yard. When I said that, I wasn't joking. I meant it when I said this night was beautiful. Even though it was late at night, the sky was extraordinarily clear at starlight, and the little of the crescent moon we had left cast a lot of light. However, the shed's location included being snuggled along a section of the yard, with numerous trees, into a large amount of the yard, while still being in deep darkness. When you think about it, having a well-defined area of shade in the dead of night, when you're expecting everything to be done, is kind of funny. Oh, and did I mention that everything was suspiciously quiet at this point? The chirping of frogs and crickets that had previously lulled me to sleep had stopped. I hadn't realized it when I first got up to go to the bathroom. Yes, but it had been quiet since I woke up. To be honest, the fact that it was so quiet may have been the reason I awoke in the first place, in addition to answering nature's call and refocusing my attention on my friend. I noticed that he was still standing by the shed. He was on the other side of the street from me. As a result, I had to approach him from behind, and thankfully it appeared as if he had finished his business, as his pants were up. "Hey, what are you doing just standing around here?" I asked, as I circled behind him and approached to his left. I didn't even wait for an answer when I realized what he was staring at. Roughly 30 feet away, hidden among the thicker area of the forest, the yard way back behind the shed, it stood. This creature was at least 6 feet tall, and a few inches taller than me. The similarities, however, ended there, with 2 legs and a hunched posture, as it appeared to have. It had raised arms and shoulders, and its head was slightly forward. The forearms were slightly longer than the upper arms, resulting in sickly-looking hands with long, claw-like points, despite being surrounded by starlight and shadow. As far as I could tell, the beast's skin was a dark grayish color. A shadow covered the majority of the head. However, he retained a general humanoid appearance. I couldn't make out a mouth or a jaw, though. The fact that the head's eyes gleamed red was unsettling. Perhaps the term glow is a bit of an exaggeration. It looked more like the red eye effect from old photos, but it lit up the area around the eye socket. Perhaps illuminators is a better term. This creature was so sickeningly frail and thin that there was no way it could have been a neighbor pranking us, as it didn't seem physically possible for something so thin to even support weight on such a frame. It then began to move at this point. My fight-or-flight response told me to get out of there, but I stood frozen and terrified of the beast. A horrific mutilation of the human form. Its body now bobbed grotesquely up and down, as if attempting to take off in flight. I hadn't noticed it before, but it appears to be wearing a cape behind its back. I say cape, but it had a fleshy texture to it, as if the skin on its back had flayed off, and it was dragging behind its arms. With each flap of its arms, this sickening flesh cape created the illusion of wings. The worst part, however, was yet to come. It made no noise, not a growl, roar, or scream. It made a raspy inhale, like someone who is severely out of breath. However, there was no reverb to this breathing. It echoed quietly, yet managed to be one of those sounds that you feel in your bones, each graveling breath raking its claws into your very soul. This dance felt like it went on for hours, because you were already frozen and terrified. But in reality, only a few seconds had passed. Our bodies finally produced enough adrenaline for us to bolt and sprint to his house. We talked about it for the next few days, but after a while, we just didn't want to relive it until we researched cryptids and decided on the idea. We came across one and decided that people would think we were crazy if we kept talking about it, so we stopped. Even to this day, I'm still not sure what happened, but it has subconsciously kept me afraid of being in wooded areas after dark for all these years. In fact, my wife, children, and I went camping at a state park last weekend. It was the first time I'd been out in the woods at night since that day, and I was terrified all night. Thankfully, nothing happened. We had a nice weekend, but it's amazing how the experience stayed with me for so long. My wife was the only other person with whom I shared this experience, and she laughed it off at first, thinking I was joking, until she saw how solemn I became when I mentioned it. And to me, it wasn't a joke. She then revealed to me that she too had witnessed something unusual. So, that's entertaining as well. Thank you for taking the time to hear what I have to say. I hope I was able to convey it correctly. Superficially, I'd say it resembled what people had described as the Mothman, but I never saw it fly, and the eyes didn't glow nearly as brightly as reports claimed. When it flailed its arms, the wings only appeared to be wings, and I'm not sure it could have flown with that ragged skin flap, but I'm not going to stay and try to figure it out. Others claim it was a crawler, but I suppose I'll never know. First and foremost, allow me to introduce myself. I'm a 20-year-old German man, but I was 17 at the time of this event. My father and I are both fishermen, and I've spent my entire life fishing. My father resides in a small town, so whenever I was there, we were always out in nature, fishing or doing something else. It was a private estate about 6 miles from my father's home, and because it had legs, my father went out and bought it one day. I know it sounds crazy, but it was true. Of course, for a 9-year-old me, having legs that no one else fished with was a dream come true. Fast forward a few years and we'd purchased this property. We set up targets for us to shoot with bows at our second home, and both my father and I had gotten pretty good at it and had compound bows. We also had constructed small huts out of logs and other materials found on the property. And if this wasn't paradise before, it certainly was now. We've had a few issues with trespassers over the years. The majority of them were people who were only there to collect mushrooms or berries and had no problems with it. There were also a few people with nefarious intentions. For my 2-week vacation, we were on the property. This was the 3rd day's morning. I spent the night in my hut. I woke around 9 o'clock in the morning, and the very first thing I did was look at my phone. My father had left a message saying he would drop off our trailer later because it was supposed to rain the next night. So I told him I'd be waiting and asked if he could drop off some extra food because I was running low on supplies, and he gladly agreed. After that, I started making my morning coffee and smoking my morning cigar. After I finished, I went fishing. I fished pretty much all day until noon. I recall looking over the small hill where the road winds through the property to the front gate, and I noticed my father's truck, with the trailer behind it, making its way down to me. So I put down my rod and went to help my father. We detached the trailer and pushed it into place. After that, my father simply exchanged a few words about how things were going, and I assured him that everything was fine. He left after giving me the food and water he had brought for me. This may appear to be a toxic relationship, but it's the polar opposite. My father and I both knew he just needed to get home so he could get to work the next day. We also knew we could talk on the weekend when he was coming to stay overnight. As a result, it was fairly normal for us. After he left and I was left alone, I decided to make myself some dinner. I fished for a while longer before deciding to do a quick check to ensure no one was on the property who wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't find anyone, but it was around that time that I began to feel watched. I'd had that feeling for the entire walk, and it hadn't left me. I was getting a little paranoid, thinking that something was watching me. Maybe it was just a deer that I didn't notice, even though I stared at the trees for what seemed like an eternity. So I kept fishing, even though I wasn't feeling well, and just tried to brush it off. As the night grew darker, it was time for me to retire. Because the feeling of being watched persisted, I moved my belongings from the hut to the trailer and stored them all there. I decided to keep my bow and knife next to my bed, because I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. I dozed off and awoke at 2 a.m. to the sound of something hitting my trailer. I just sat there and listened. The feeling of being watched intensified, as it sounded like small rocks hitting the roof, along with a new sense of dread that something bad was about to happen. So, I had to make a choice. I could either stay put or go investigate. So I turned on my headlamp and lantern, which I placed just outside my trailer's front door, grabbed my knife, reholstered it in the holster on my bed, grabbed my bow and quiver, and went outside. When I looked around, there was nothing beyond the tree line, and the sound of something hitting the trailer had also stopped. Now I was irritated, because I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but I wanted to make sure no one was actually present. So I decided to make another trip around the property just to make sure. Bow in hand, I made my way around, and found no one, even more enraged because I returned to my trailer, and I froze as soon as I saw the front of it. There had to be something there. I instantly killed the headlamps. So whatever it was couldn't see me, and I stood there watching because of the lantern I had left near the door. I had a good view of the thing, but it couldn't see me, or at the very least, it did not react. It was just banging up against the side of my trailer. The silence of the night was broken by an ungodly shriek that I can only describe as unlike anything I've ever heard. I noticed that I had hit it, but it didn't work. It turned to face me at that point. I reloaded my arrow and resumed the fight, and it just started leaping at me. This thing was lightning fast. I don't believe it was related, but I didn't care. I turned and dashed through the underbrush, cutting myself all over. I came to a halt near a paved road on the property's edge to listen, and noticed there was nothing behind me any longer. I dropped to my knees and began shaking, and was completely terrified. I waited until the sun came up, and then returned to the trailer. When I got there, I looked for signs that I was hallucinating, because I was in disbelief, and I could see the tracks of where this thing started running after me. Not like distinct footprints, but rather a path of shattered bush and broken branches. I've also yet to find the arrows that I fired that night. So I sat down, bow in hand, until my father came to check on me. He did it almost every day. When he noticed the cuts on my arms and legs, he asked what happened, and I brushed it off and casually told him. I tripped over a thorn bush. This is a story I've never told him. In fact, this is the first time I've mentioned it. We still go to the property now and then, but I always bring a large hunting knife and my bow. For the next 2 years, I had nightmares about what could have happened, and I'm still not sure what I saw. It wasn't my imagination, I'm sure. I was out hunting with my friends at our usual spot. Keep in mind that this happened about 13 years ago. I'm sitting at my spot looking at the deer. There's nothing worth shooting at. I'm having a good time watching the animals. It's getting close to the golden hour, about twilight. About 85 yards away is this tree line that bumps against the other property. I've been hunting in these woods for the better part of almost 5 years. That's when I noticed a black object moving against the tree line. Its movement was somewhat cumbersome. My immediate thought was that it was just another hunter. I get kind of upset that he decides to mess around this late in the game, when all of a sudden he takes off sprinting. This creature takes 4 to 5 leaps and has crossed the tree line. It's about 200 yards long, mind you. This creature took 6 to 7 leaps and cleared it in a few seconds. My buddy and I had walkie-talkies to keep each other informed about our location, or if we saw deer moving to each other's location. I immediately tell him something human is moving along the tree line at an insane speed. After I talk to him, he confirms it, and we got the hell out of there. We never saw whatever it was again. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit that bell notification if you want to listen to more.